Welcome to grammar lesson number 6, which I'm calling for this segment, How to Ruin Your Favorite Children's Books. It's a little bit longer. It's going to come in 2 parts, and it's going to be looking at a couple of things, sort of reiterating points that we've made already in previous videos, and then covering a couple of new things. Depending on how this goes, this may become a series because I've got lots of children's books at home. So, the book we'll be looking at today is called Sweet Child of Mine. Within the last week or so, I've read this probably 5,000 or 10,000 times to my son. But I like the book, and I actually noticed while I was reading it to him that the sentences in it are doing a lot of the things that we've covered in previous videos, so I thought it'd be a pretty great example. Plus, when you're an English nerd like me, once you have a book entirely memorized, you start to look sort of through the story and pick up on the grammar and stuff that's going on. So we'll take a look at each of the sentences, talk about it kind of briefly. Some of them will be just sort of review, and then we'll cover some new things as we go. So our first sentence is, I love you in the morning at the start of every day. So if we cover the basics right, we'll quickly identify that this actually is a sentence. We start with a capital letter, have a period at the end, and we can identify that we have a subject and verb, right? I, subject, love, verb. And the object of the verb, the noun or pronoun receiving the action here, receiving the love, is you. I love you. Okay, so we have that complete thought. We have the punctuation. We have the capital letter. So we have a sentence. In addition to the subject, verb, and object, we have 3 prepositional phrases. And we've talked about prepositional phrases before. They populate sentences all over the place. It's where we get a lot of our detail. So the prepositional phrases in this sentence are in the morning, at the start, and of every day. And just a brief reminder, a prepositional phrase starts with the preposition and ends with or has as its object a noun or a pronoun. So in, at, of, and their objects are morning, start, and day. Here's a new term for you. We call this a simple sentence because it has only one clause. In a previous video, we talked about clauses and phrases. A clause is a group of words that has both a subject and verb, and a phrase is a group of words that does not have both a subject and verb. So a simple sentence is a sentence that has only one clause, and that clause is an independent clause, a sentence that can stand on its own, right? It expresses a complete thought. So, second sentence. I love you in the evening when sunshine goes away. Now, take a look here. What's going on? We have, not to give away the structure of the book, but basically every page is going to begin with I love you, so we know we'll have our independent clause there at the beginning of the sentence. And actually following that independent clause, we have another prepositional phrase, in the evening. But then something different is happening. We have when sunshine goes away. And now we're beginning what we call a dependent clause. We still have a set of subject and verb. Sunshine is our subject. The verb is goes, but it does not express a complete thought because we have this dependent marker word or subordinate conjunction, and that word is when sunshine goes away. So if we take that package of language, that group of words, when sunshine goes away, yes, we have a subject and a verb. We could capitalize when, but we still would not have a proper sentence because it does not express a complete thought, okay? We call it a dependent clause or a subordinate clause because it depends or is subordinate to the independent clause. That information only makes sense if we have the information in the independent clause. So, subject in the dependent clause is sunshine, the verb is goes, and our dependent marker word or subordinate conjunction is when. I'm just going to call these dependent marker words because the language is a little bit plainer and I don't want to intimidate you or make you think that you have to have all of this memorized. So I'm going to try to stick with the simplest vocabulary that I can. Here's another term for you though. We call this a complex sentence. So we know any sentence has to have one independent clause, one clause that expresses a complete thought. But a complex sentence has that one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. So in our previous example, we had a simple sentence. Now we have a complex sentence. And just to talk a second about conjunctions, you're probably familiar with the words on the left, for and nor, or but, yet so. The fanboys words, if you look at the first letter of those words. These form compound sentences. A compound sentence is a sentence that has 2 or more independent clauses. I love you and you love me. I love you, subject, verb, object. You love me, subject, verb, object, connected with and. Subordinating conjunctions like after, because, before, there's a whole list of them. These form complex sentences, and those clauses are subordinate to, they're dependent upon the information that's in the independent clause. Okay, so these are sorts of words that you'll be looking out for as we move through our videos. Next sentence. I love you when the stars glow in the dim moonlight. Subject, I love you. I, subject, verb, love, object, you. Probably won't talk about that anymore because it's going to stay the same throughout the rest of the book. Now what happens after I love you? When the stars glow in the dim moonlight. Well, we just saw that word when before, right? So what do you think that means? It means we have a dependent clause. So as we look through the dependent clause, what's our subject? The subject is stars. What are the stars doing? They glow. What else is in that dependent clause? In the dim moonlight. What's that? It's a prepositional phrase. Preposition in, object moonlight. The and dim are modifying moonlight. They're describing moonlight. And since we have an independent clause, I love you, and the dependent clause, when the stars glow in the dim moonlight, we have a complex sentence. I love you in the silence that comes with every night. Okay, I love you. Now I'm not going to throw our information up yet, just let you think about what's going on here. So what's our next group of words in the sentence? In the silence. What's that? Does it have a set of subject and verb? No. So this is a phrase. What type of phrase is it? It's a prepositional phrase. What is our next group of words? That comes with every night. Now, do we have a set of subject and verb? This one is not quite as clear as the previous two examples, but this is a dependent clause. If you'll remember our that which video, those are relative clauses. It's a type of dependent clause. And in these situations, the dependent marker word or relative pronoun is actually serving as the subject and the marker word at the same time. So let's take a look at that. Subject and everything is staying the same in the first part. Prepositional phrase in the silence. Now we have that acting as the subject of our dependent or relative clause. Its verb is comes. The marker word is also that, so that is serving two purposes. And this dependent clause has its own prepositional phrase with every night. And so if we take a look, we have an independent clause at the beginning, a dependent clause at the end, so we have a complex sentence, independent plus dependent. This sentence is 2 pages long. We're getting exciting, right? I love you when the wind is still and in the warm spring breeze. So, I love you, subject, verb, object. That's our independent clause. What's our next set of words? When the wind is still and in the warm spring breeze. We've seen when a few times already, so what does that indicate to you? Probably means that we have a dependent clause. If we want to check and see if that's true, any clause has to have a set of subject and verb. So what is the subject? Wind. What's the verb? Is. Okay, the wind is. So we do have a set of subject and verb. We have that marker word or subordinate conjunction when. And then also in that dependent clause we have another prepositional phrase, in the warm spring breeze. So independent clause, the stuff on the left you've seen before. Dependent clause, subject is wind, the verb is. It's a linking verb. We've been dealing mostly with action verbs so far. And what is the wind? Well, in this case, the wind is still. This technically is not called a direct object because we're dealing with a linking verb. I'll get to that on the next slide. It's a little confusing. So we have subject, wind, verb is, and we have what the wind is, which is still. We have our marker word, when, and then at the end we have a prepositional phrase, in the warm spring breeze. And so since we have an independent clause and a dependent clause, this is a complex sentence. Now, let's just try to differentiate what's different between a direct object of a verb and the subject complement. Okay, action verbs, which we've been dealing with mostly so far, they take objects, either direct or indirect. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Objects of action verbs must be nouns or pronouns. Okay, I ate breakfast. Ate is the verb, breakfast is a noun. I threw the ball. Threw is my verb. What did I throw? The ball. Ball is a noun. Linking verbs, however, take subject complements. So if we look at the very bottom here, most linking verbs, or a lot of times linking verbs, will be some form of the verb be. So be, is, am, are, was, were, something like that. So here's an example. I could say, I am a man. Well, in this case, the subject complement, what I am, is a noun, man. But I could also say, I am cold. Cold is an adjective, it's not a noun. So this is why we don't really consider this an object, because an object has to be a noun or a pronoun. These are what we call subject complements. And if you're going through the course, don't worry, I'm not going to make you know the term subject complements. But when we talk about direct objects, I know some people can get tripped up because we're used to talking about objects, which are nouns or pronouns, and now we have subject complements, which can also be adjectives. So I just wanted to lay that out there. You don't have to be confused by the terminology. Just be aware that when you're dealing with a linking verb, you might have an adjective, okay? And you can think of the linking verb as being an equal sign. What am I? Basically, you can think of the sentence as saying, I equals man. I equals cold, okay? You're equating one part of the sentence with the other part of the sentence. So, quick difference between action verbs and linking verbs and the words that are sort of receiving the information in that verb. I love you in the summer sun and with the fallen leaves. So, I love you, same thing as usual. Now what's next? In the summer sun. I know this is pretty repetitive, but I hope by now you can look at that and say automatically, oh, yeah, I get that. That's a prepositional phrase. In, preposition, object, sun. Now what do we have? And with the fallen leaves. Maybe you're also identifying with as a preposition, leaves as its object. So we have two prepositional phrases, an independent clause. Do we have any other set of subject and verb? And no, we do not. We have other nouns, but we don't have any other verbs that accompany those nouns. So we actually have a simple sentence. Everything on the left is the same independent clause, two prepositional phrases, simple sentence. If you look at the bottom of the middle column here, I'm just making a point. We've talked about the different forms of verbs and how they can be used. Fallen, the adjective here, is the past participle of the word fall, the verb fall. So we have the main verb fall or falls, the simple past tense, which is used as a verb, which is fell, and then fallen, which can be used as a verb. If you say, I have fallen in love, fallen has to be used with a helping verb have, or has, or had. But now, if we're using it without that helping verb, it's being used as an adjective. What kind of leaves? The fallen leaves. So just to reiterate again, that just because you see a word that looks like a verb, it doesn't mean that it's always acting like a verb. And so you might not have even considered this to be a verb form, but it is. It's just acting as something besides a verb. I love you in the crisp white snow that quietly fills the sky. I love you, same old thing, in the crisp white snow. What's that? Prepositional phrase. It's a little bit longer, but it's a prepositional phrase. One preposition, one object. In snow. What kind of snow? The crisp white. These are all words modifying snow. Now what's next? That quietly fills the sky. Well, we've had videos about that and which. We've already had a sentence using that in this video. So what do you think we have here? It's a dependent clause. And again, it's a dependent or relative clause where that is the marker word and the subject of that clause. So we know the verb is fills. We can figure that out. What fills? That fills. What's it filling? The sky. Now we call these sorts of dependent clauses relative clauses because the word that or which will relate to another word in the sentence. What is that relative to? What is it describing? Well, it's describing the snow, right? The snow is the thing that quietly fills the sky. So when you use the word relative, you can think of what that word that is referring back to in the sentence. So that is referring back to the snow. So the snow that quietly fills the sky. We also have in the dependent clause an object of the verb fills. What is being filled? The sky. So snow, which is that, quietly fills the sky. Because we have an independent clause and a dependent clause, we have a complex sentence. I love you in the stormy air when strong dark clouds pass by. Same thing, right? Same sort of structure. I love you, independent clause, in the stormy air, prepositional phrase. When strong dark clouds pass by. We've seen when a couple of times. Dependent marker word. Clouds is our subject. Verb is pass or pass by. So something here I want to talk about real quick. We have something funky with the verb pass or pass by. We call that a phrasal, which is a verb plus a preposition. So I'm going to talk about that in the next slide for a second. But everything else here is pretty standard. We've seen it in other slides. About phrasals. So it's a verb plus a preposition, and we call the preposition a particle. And here are a few examples. The teacher blew up at the misbehaving students. 2 teenagers fell out of the bed of the truck. Okay? So if you look at these sentences, I've got in bold the verb, which is blew up or fell out, and then a prepositional phrase that follows that verb, at the misbehaving students. And so if you look at how the verb and the prepositional phrase butt up against each other, we actually have 2 prepositions, one after the other. Blew up. So if you're looking through the sentence, you might think that up is the beginning of a prepositional phrase, but it can't be because there's no noun or pronoun that serves as its object, right? Because the next thing that follows is another preposition with its own object. So these are prepositions that are attached to the verb. Other examples are, sign up or ask out. I signed my son up for swimming lessons. Here, those verbs take objects like I signed who up? My son. Ted asked Robin out on a date. Ted asked who out? Robin. Okay? So here we have objects of these verbs, and those objects come between the verb and the particle or the preposition. But again, you'll see that the preposition is butted up against another preposition. Up for swimming lessons. Out on a date. So if you see 2 prepositions back to back, that might be your clue that you have a phrasal. And once again, I don't really care if you know this word phrasal. That's the name of it, so that's how I'm going to talk about it. I will never quiz you on this, but that's the terminology if you're curious. And I know that if you see a couple of prepositions back to back, it might be confusing. So I just wanted to point this out so that you can sort of have this in your bank of knowledge as we move forward. Okay, we're going to finish the final 2 pages in another video because the next sentence gets a little tricky. See you then.